Doctor. Anaya Gupta stared up at the starry sky, her heart pounding with a mingled sense of awe and trepidation. Around her, the night buzzed with cicadas and crickets, the humid summer air heavy on her skin. But she barely noticed, her attention fixed on the impossible sight above. The meteor shower had begun right on schedule, the Perseids streaking across the heavens in silent flashes of light. It was an annual event, usually a cause for joy and wonder. Anaya never missed it, always eager to witness the celestial spectacle. But this time was different. This time, the shooting stars weren't content to burn up harmlessly in the atmosphere. Instead, as she watched in disbelief, dozens of them slowed, separating from the pack, growing larger and brighter, until there could be no doubt they were ships. Vessels from another world, drawn in sleek and impossible shapes that defied human engineering. Some were long and needle-like, others a cluster of iridescent spheres. One resembled a vast, translucent butterfly, its wings rippling with hypnotic patterns. And they were headed straight for Earth. Anaya tracked their descent with a clenched jaw, her astrophysicist mind whirring, trying to calculate trajectories, velocities, to quantify the unquantifiable. Around her, the University of Delhi Observatory erupted into barely controlled chaos. Researchers shouted coordinates, telescopes whirring to track the bogies. Expletives and exclamations in a dozen languages filled the air, the whole team shocked into action. "It's an invasion, Rajesh," one of her grad students breathed. His young face was slack with terror in the light from his computer screen. "They're attacking." Anaya wanted to refute him, to offer reassurance, but the words lodged in her throat. Because he might be right. This could be humanity's last night on Earth, the end of their dominion. The ships drew closer, growing from abstract shapes into undeniable aircrafts. Anaya braced for the sounds of explosions, the concussive blasts of alien weapons. The death throes of her species, snuffed out in an instant by an insurmountable extraterrestrial force. But no attack came. The ships, hundreds of them now, simply slowed to a hover miles above the Earth's surface. Hanging in the air like ripe fruit, their hulls glinting in the moonlight, waiting. For long minutes, no one moved. No one spoke. The whole world seeming to hold its breath, paralyzed by the epochal significance of the moment. Then, with a soft chime, Anaya's phone lit up with an incoming call. She stared at it blankly, uncomprehending. The screen showed an unknown number, a string of unfamiliar digits. With a trembling hand, she accepted the call. "Doctor." Gupta, the voice on the other end, was male, with only a faint electronic edge to mark it as non-human. "Please do not be alarmed. We come in peace." Anaya gripped the phone tighter, swallowing hard. A million questions burned on her tongue, but she bit them back, forcing her voice to a level calm with a Herculean effort of will. "Who are you? What do you want?" "I am Ambassador Zilthran of the Marelian Concordance. We have traveled a great distance to reach you, with considerable effort to learn your languages and customs." The alien's tone was placid, almost soothing. As for what we want, in a word, to help. Anaya blinked. Whatever she'd expected, that wasn't it. Help? Help how? Why? "Your species stands on the brink," Zilthran said. "You have unlocked the secrets of the atom, begun to reach beyond the confines of your world. But your wisdom lags behind your technical prowess. Your maturity as a culture, as a consciousness, has not kept pace with your power. Left unchecked, you risk annihilation of yourselves and of the precious biosphere that birthed you." Anaya felt an involuntary shiver run down her spine. It was nothing she hadn't thought herself 1,000 times, watching humanity careen recklessly into the 21st century. The dangers and dysfunctions were glaring: nuclear brinksmanship, environmental devastation, the psychological strains of an ever-accelerating world. They were on a knife's edge, disaster looming. But to hear it stated so plainly from an alien intelligence was another matter entirely. An outside context problem, passing judgment on their entire civilization. It was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. "You're here to stop us from self-destructing?" she asked incredulously. "To save us from ourselves?" In a manner of speaking, she could hear the smile in Zilthran's voice, but not by force or coercion. "We have no interest in conquest or colonization, only in offering you the philosophical, spiritual, and ethical tools to master your technological power, to wield it responsibly, for the good of all." Anaya's head swam. It was too much, too overwhelming. An existential bombshell dropped on an unsuspecting species. She struggled to process the implications, the staggering scope of what was being offered. "And you think we'll accept?" Just like that, a note of challenge crept into her voice. "That we'll submit to your tutelage. Abandon our ways for yours." "Not at all," Zilthrin said mildly. "We have no intention of imposing our will or our culture upon you. Ours will be an open exchange, a meeting of minds across the vastness of space. We will learn as much from you as you from us, your art and history, your hard-won wisdom. In time, both our civilizations will be enriched." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost entreating. "But such weighty matters are not for tonight. Now is a time for celebration, for marvel and joy at the expanding of horizons. The universe has grown larger for us all." In the background of the call, Anaya heard a rising murmur. Voices on the other end, the syllables liquid and alien. Then Zilthrin spoke once more. "I'm afraid I must take my leave, Dr. Gupta. There is still much to coordinate, and all the peoples of your world to address. But we will speak again soon." He hesitated, then added, "I know this is all very sudden and strange, but please believe that we come with the best of intentions, in peace and in friendship. Hold to that in the hours ahead." The line went dead and Anaya slowly lowered the phone. Around her, the observatory seethed with barely suppressed panic, a hive of activity as the staff monitored the fleet overhead. Beyond them, she knew the whole world would be buzzing, reeling from the news, the impossible revelation. Everything had changed tonight. The boundaries of their reality redrawn in an instant. The universe would never be the same. She looked up at the alien ships, still hovering serenely, gleaming in the celestial dark like beacons. Or perhaps like stars, guiding them to a new future. One pregnant with both promise and peril. Anaya shivered, despite the warm night air. It was, as Zilthrin said, a time for wonder, for joy and celebration at the sudden expansion of possibility. She knew she should be marveling, should be dizzy with excitement at the new epoch unfolding. But all she could feel was a deep, gnawing unease, a sense that, for better or worse, nothing would ever be the same. The human adventure was headed for uncharted waters, and she couldn't shake the feeling it was the start of something far stranger and more dangerous than any of them yet realized. The next days passed in a surreal blur. The Marlians, as the world came to know them, remained in orbit, a constant presence in the sky day and night. Their ships glinting in the sun, pulsing gently with an inner phosphorescence after dark. But they made no further overt moves, no aggressive or threatening actions. Indeed, they seemed to go out of their way to be unthreatening. The fleet maintaining a respectful distance, individual ships occasionally descending to a lower altitude but never breaching atmosphere, never setting down on soil. Instead, they communicated. Each world leader, each UN representative receiving personalized broadcasts, carefully crafted messages addressed to them by name in their native tongues, gently outlining the purpose of the Marillion mission. It was a peace offering, they all said. A hand of friendship extended across the stars. The Marillions had no designs on Earth's resources, no desire to interfere in their affairs. They simply wished to open a dialogue, to begin a cultural and philosophical exchange for the ages. The world responded with a wary, fragile hope. There were those who advocated a militant response, scrambling warplanes, making shows of force. But they were a minority, shouted down by a global wave of optimism. After all, if the Marillions wanted conquest, why announce themselves? Why not simply strike with the element of surprise when Earth's guard was down? No, this was something new, something unprecedented. For perhaps the first time in history, humanity found itself united, drawn together by the sudden knowledge that they were not alone, that the universe was a vaster, stranger place than they ever dared dream. Anaya watched it all unfold from her Delhi observatory, working around the clock to monitor and analyze the alien fleet. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. When the invitation came to attend the First Contact Summit, she wasn't surprised. There were whispers that the Marillions had asked for her by name, identified her as the mind they most wanted to engage with. It was flattering, in its way, but also deeply unsettling. What had drawn their attention? What made her stand out? She was a respected astrophysicist, yes, a leader in her field. But she was no diplomat, no politician or philosopher king, just a scientist doing her best to probe the mysteries of the cosmos. Still, she accepted. How could she not? It was the opportunity, the responsibility of a lifetime. To be humanity's ambassador to the stars, to a new epoch of the possible. So she found herself in The Hague, threading her way through security cordons and media gauntlets. The cobbled streets of the ancient city choked with vehicles and equipment, representatives from every corner of the globe descending for the summit. When she finally reached the conference hall, she had to pause in the doorway. The huge space was packed with a dizzying array of humanity, every ethnicity, every culture. Suits and saris, keffiyehs and kimonos, a rainbow of skin tones from porcelain to obsidian. And everywhere, an electric thrum of excitement, of nervous energy bordering on giddiness, as if they were all children on some grand adventure. Anaya understood the feeling. How could one not be awed, stepping into a moment that would echo through history? But beneath it all was that same unease. That same sense of vertigo, of reality shifting beneath her feet. She still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than met the eye. That the Merlians' arrival heralded something far more seismic than they were letting on. Still, she straightened her shoulders and found her seat. Now wasn't the time for doubts or apprehensions. This was a beginning, a new chapter for her species. It demanded her full presence, her total commitment. The hall fell silent as the assembled dignitaries took their places. A hush of expectation, the air itself seeming to vibrate with pent-up energy. Anaya found herself leaning forward in her seat, blood thrumming. Then a chime sounded, and a holo screen flickered to life at the front of the hall. The Marian ambassador, the insectoid visage Anaya had come to know from a dozen broadcasts, took shape in the air. Zilthran, his name was, emissary of the stars. People of Earth, he began. His voice that same mellow, faintly electronic buzz. Words cannot express our joy at this moment, which will be remembered for eons as the first meeting of our two civilizations. Behind him, the wall of the conference hall fell away. Then the room, the city, and finally the Earth itself, shrinking to a glittering blue marble suspended in the void. The assembled dignitaries gasped, a ripple of awe passing through the crowd. In its place, a starfield bloomed. Vast and glittering, celestial jewels dusting the infinite black. And there, hanging in the center, was a planet, azure and aquamarine, swirled with clouds. It was a mirror of Earth, but the continents were strange, cast in unfamiliar shapes. "Behold, Marilia," Zilthran said softly. "Our homeworld, our shining gem. We share it with you now as we hope to one day share the wonders and secrets of the universe." The alien paused, compound eyes glinting in the ghostly light of the projection. "For that is why we have journeyed to your infant world. Not to conquer or control, but to open your minds to the true scope of creation. To set your feet on the path of enlightenment." Anaya heard the awed murmurs around her, saw the smiles dawning on faces, the hope kindling in eyes. It shone from every countenance, drowning out doubt or suspicion. In that moment, the Moralian's purpose seemed achingly pure, luminous and sublime, a cosmic grace note. But still, that worm of unease burrowed in her gut. She couldn't say why Zilthran's words were flawless, his aspirations profound. The assembled world leaders were already enthralled, ready to lay down arms and animosities in the face of this epochal olive branch, but something nagged at her. Some whisper of warning, a tug of suspicion. Call it the skepticism of a scientist, that professional bent toward doubt. Or perhaps it was something deeper. An animal instinct, the subconscious pull of some primordial pattern. Whatever its source, she couldn't shake it. So she sat, spine rigid, as the speeches flowed around her. Grand invocations of species destiny, of the bright future now laid at their feet, of the paradise to come, if they would only join hands with their celestial brethren. She held her peace as one by one, the world's statesmen and stateswomen pledged their cooperation, their gratitude and goodwill, voiced in 100 tongues translated smoothly by attentive aides. It was heady stuff, the atmosphere in the hall turning positively electric. At last Zilthran spoke again, his reedy voice striking a solemn note. "We are honored and humbled by your welcome, by the trust you place in us and the bond we forge today." The projection changed, Merlia receding. In its place, a pair of clasped hands took shape, one human, one an insectile claw. "In the spirit of openness, we will be establishing cultural exchanges. Embassies in each of your great cities, where our ambassadors can live and learn among you." The three-dimensional hands began to dissolve, breaking down into swirling atoms that reshaped themselves. Strange, branching structures, somewhere between sculpture and architecture, blossomed in the air. We will share our knowledge in science and philosophy and art. Expand your understanding, raise your consciousness to new heights. Together, we will build a galactic alliance to span the eons. Around Anaya, the assembled dignitaries broke into applause. Even some cheers, the unrestrained joy of a species stepping into a larger universe. But she couldn't bring herself to join in, her hands leaden in her lap. Those embassies made her nervous, with their alien contours and unreadable purpose. Cultural exchange was one thing, but to welcome foreign powers into the heart of their cities. Humanity had tried that before, and found those initial overtures could hide darker agendas. But when Zilthran turned glittering compound eyes on her, Anaya forced a smile. Now wasn't the time to voice doubts, to cast a pall over the summit with a suspicious mind. This was a beginning fragile as a soap bubble. It needed to be handled delicately, carefully. She would bide her time and watch. Observe these Marians closely, take the measure of their true intentions, and if her fears proved founded, if this great gift horse proved more than it seemed, well, she would burn that bridge when she came to it. For now, she would join in the hope, but she wouldn't let herself be swept away. Humanity's future was at stake, after all, and she intended to safeguard it, come what may from the stars. The Marelian embassies went up with astonishing speed. In seemingly no time at all, the alien structures graced the skylines of every world capital, their bejeweled spires rising above the urban sprawl. Anaya watched their progress obsessively, tracking the construction via satellite imagery. She told herself it was scientific curiosity, the astrophysicist marveling at such an advanced species' capabilities. But in her heart, she knew that old unease still gnawed. The feeling only intensified as the cultural exchanges began in earnest. Marelian philosophers and artists took up residence in the embassies, holding forth in airy atriums and crystalline halls. They spoke of their ancient history, their path to enlightenment, of the great galactic community Earth might one day join. Their words were broadcast far and wide, translated into every language. The world hung on every syllable, enraptured by this wisdom from beyond the stars. These alien sages quickly became celebrities, their serene visages gracing magazine covers and talk shows. Anaya attended as many of their lectures as she could, slipping into crowded auditoriums and live feeds. She had to admit their insights were profound, their grasp of the universe's working staggering in its depth and breadth. They spoke of consciousness as a fundamental force woven into the fabric of space-time, of the cyclical nature of civilizations rising and falling like the tides, of the need for balance, for harmony with the cosmos and all its myriad expressions of life. It was heady stuff, and she could see the effect it had on people. The way eyes shone with newfound purpose, the fervent nods of agreement. The Merlians were giving humanity something it hadn't realized how badly it needed. A higher calling, a sense of meaning in a chaotic world. But still, that flicker of doubt wouldn't quite die. Because for all the soaring rhetoric, the Marians remained oddly opaque about the specifics of their culture, their technology, their practical philosophies of governance and resource allocation. Oh, they dropped tantalizing hints, vague references to post-scarcity economics, to some unifying purpose that guided their civilization. But the details remained hazy, couched in metaphor and parable. And then there were the joint projects. The research partnerships pairing human and Marian scientists on endeavors that made Anaya's head spin. Wormhole metrics, dimensional engineering, the manipulation of space and time at a fundamental level. It was thrilling, groundbreaking work. The kind of cutting-edge science Anaya had always dreamed of pursuing. But something about the Marians' focus unsettled her, some pattern she couldn't quite put her finger on. They seemed less interested in advancing human knowledge than in guiding it, steering it towards certain avenues while gently but firmly discouraging others. Always with a smile, with an invocation of some higher wisdom. But the end result was the same. Humanity was being subtly shaped. Its progress accelerated along paths of the Marelians' choosing. And for all their talk of free exchange, of equal partnership, Anaya couldn't shake the feeling that the flow of knowledge was distinctly one way. Oh, they shared marvels aplenty. Tantalizing glimpses of advanced tech, of scientific principles far beyond current human understanding. But it was always piecemeal, always in service of some larger agenda that remained just out of sight. Anaya brought her concerns to the world leaders, to the UN ambassadors who now practically lived in the embassy's halls. But she found their ears increasingly deaf, their eyes glazed with something approaching religious fervor. They brushed off her warnings with beatific smiles, assuring her that the Marians had only humanity's best interests at heart, that their guidance was a gift, a sacred trust not to be questioned. She wanted to scream, to shake them out of their starry-eyed complaisance. Couldn't they see they were being manipulated? That for all their talk of cooperation, the Merlians were subtly steering the course of human history? But she bit her tongue, biding her time. She was a scientist, after all. She needed proof, hard evidence to back up her growing unease. Speculation and suspicion wouldn't cut it, not when the Merlians had so thoroughly captured the public imagination. So Anaya watched and waited. She attended every lecture, pored over every scrap of shared knowledge, looked for the patterns, the hidden currents beneath the surface, and slowly, painstakingly, she began to piece together a picture. A glimpse of the Merlians' true agenda, the endgame they worked toward with such patient skill. It was there in the technologies they chose to share, and those they withheld. In the philosophical principles they seeded into human discourse, subtly guiding the currents of thought. They were shaping humanity, yes, but not into a peer, an equal partner in some grand galactic community. No, they were molding it into something else entirely. A client species. A civilization forever beholden to Merlian wisdom, Merlian tech. A lesser power, eternally in the thrall of its benefactors. The realization hit Anaya like a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless and reeling. It was so insidious, so cleverly done. Couched in the language of altruism, of enlightenment and progress. But the end result was a staggering loss of autonomy. A slow, creeping subversion of everything that made humanity unique, their art, their culture, their very modes of thought being gently but inexorably reshaped. And the worst part was, they were welcoming it. Humanity was so desperate for meaning, for a higher calling, that it was ready to trade its birthright for a song, to hand over the keys to its destiny, never looking back. Anaya knew she had to act, had to find some way to break the spell, to snap her species out of its starry-eyed thrall. But she was just one woman, a lone voice crying in the cosmic wilderness. She needed allies, needed some way to make the world see the truth. But everywhere she turned, she found only glassy smiles, a placid acceptance of the Marian gospel. Even her colleagues, her fellow scientists, seemed to have succumbed. They marveled at the alien tech, rhapsodized about the new frontiers of knowledge opening up, never stopping to question the price, the subtle erosion of all they held dear. Anaya grew increasingly desperate, increasingly isolated. She stopped attending the lectures, sequestered herself in her lab, poring over the data, looking for something, anything, to shake humanity out of its fugue. And then, in a dusty corner of the darknet, she found it. A leaked fragment of Merlian communication, decoded by some rogue hacker collective. A single line of text, glowing on her screen like a lifeline. Integration proceeds apace. Terran resistance crumbling. Metamorphosis imminent. Anaya stared at the words, her blood turning to ice. Metamorphosis. The Merlians had never used that word, never spoken of their plans in such bald terms, but there it was, in glowing black and white. The final step in their grand design, the end of the human story subsumed into something new and unrecognizable. She had to stop it, had to find some way to rally humanity, to make them see the danger before it was too late. But she knew with sinking certainty that it would not be enough to simply spread the word. The Merlian grip was too tight, the conditioning too complete. No, she needed something more. Something visceral, something that would shock humanity out of its placid acceptance. A splash of cold water to the face of a species sleepwalking toward oblivion. And in that moment, Anaya knew what she had to do. The thought turned her stomach, made her soul shrink in horror. But there was no choice. The survival of her species hung in the balance. With trembling hands, she began to plan. To gather the materials she would need, chart the course of action. It went against everything she believed in, everything she held sacred as a scientist and a human being. But the stakes were too high. She had to shatter the illusion, had to make humanity see the Merlians for what they truly were. Even if it meant sacrificing everything she was. For the future of Earth, no price was too high. And as Anaya worked feverishly through the night, a calm settled over her. The calm of grim necessity, of a terrible duty shouldered. She would play the monster, become the villain, and, in so doing, perhaps buy her species a fighting chance. It was a cold comfort, but it was all she had left. The Mauryan embassy in Delhi was a marvel of alien architecture. Soaring and crystalline, it rose above the smoggy skyline like a thing not quite of this world. Its facets caught the harsh Indian sun, refracting it into dazzling spectra that played across the streets below. To the people of the city, it had become a symbol of hope, of progress, of a brighter future just around the corner. They gathered beneath its spires and their thousands, faces upturned, basking in the promise of a new age. Anaya moved through the crowd like a ghost, a thin smile pasted on her face. In the days since her grim realization, she had thrown herself into the preparations, gathering the materials, running the simulations, over and over until she could do it in her sleep. It had been easy enough in the end. The Moralians were so trusting, so sure of their hold over humanity. They never suspected that one of their star pupils might turn against them, that the wide-eyed acolyte might be a viper in their midst. And so Anaya had played her part. Attended the lectures, asked the right questions, made all the right noises of enthusiasm and enlightenment. All the while, her true work continued in the shadows. The embassy's security was laughable. A few guards, more ceremonial than functional. They barely glanced at her as she passed, her stolen ID badge flapping at her chest. Why would they? She was one of the chosen, the elect, the shining future of a unified Earth, if only they knew. Anaya's smile twisted bitterly as she slipped into the gleaming atrium. The rucksack at her side felt heavy, laden with the weight of her grim purpose. Inside, the embassy was a hive of activity. Sages and acolytes bustled to and fro, lost in earnest conversation. Alien artworks hovering in the air, their meaning obscure. The low thrum of Merlian technologies at work suffused the space, setting Anaya's teeth on edge. But she didn't have time to dwell on it. Already, a group of acolytes was approaching her, their faces lit with welcome. She forced her smile wider, falling into step beside them. The tour passed in a blur, Anaya making all the appropriate noises of appreciation and awe, but her mind was elsewhere, running over the plan again and again, marking the locations of the charges, the angles of maximum effect. She knew the layout of the embassy by heart, had studied the blueprints until they were seared into her brain. There could be no room for error, not now. At last, the group broke for refreshments in a soaring atrium. A fountain played at the center, its waters glittering with an alien iridescence. Around it, Merlians and humans alike clustered in animated discussion. The air hummed with a dozen different languages, a dozen different dialects of fervor and enlightenment. Anaya drifted to the edge of the crowd, her hand slipping into her rucksack. The first charge was small, no bigger than a deck of cards. But it felt heavy in her palm, dense with dark purpose. Her eyes flicked to the fountain, to the knot of beings around it. Merlians and humans, the philosopher and the disciple, so engaged in their high-minded discourse, so sure of their grand design. They never saw her coming, never registered the threat until it was far, far too late. Anaya thumbed at the detonator, and the world went white. A roar filled her ears, a hammer blow slamming into her chest. The concussion wave sent her sprawling, the breath whooshing from her lungs. For a moment she lay stunned, blinking spots from her eyes. Then the screaming started. Shrieks of terror and agony, the sounds of shattering glass and crumbling stone. The acrid stench of smoke and burning meat. Anaya staggered to her feet, ash and blood caking her face. Around her, the atrium was a scene from hell. Bodies sprawled broken and bleeding, twisted lumps of charred flesh. The fountain was a crater, choked with rubble and viscera. And there, in the center of it all, a Merlian sage. Its once resplendent robes were tattered and smoldering, its compound eyes blown to ruin. It twitched and mewled, ichor pooling around its shattered limbs. Anaya stumbled toward it, numb shock giving way to a cold, bright rage. This was the enemy, the insidious force that would unmake her species, dissolve it in a tide of smiling subversion. She snatched up a jagged shard of metal, the edges biting into her palm. The sage's head lolled toward her, its mandibles working soundlessly, pleading, perhaps, or cursing her in some unknown tongue. Anaya didn't care. She brought the shard down, again and again, until the sage was a pulped ruin. until her arm ached and her breath came in ragged sobs. Around her, the screams had taken on a different tenor, shock and horror giving way to rage. The security guards were pushing through now, stun batons crackling. Anaya bared her teeth in a feral grin. Good, let them come. Let them see the cost of their meddling, writ in the blood of sage and acolyte alike. Let the illusion be shattered, however brutal the awakening. She armed the second charge, hurling it into the oncoming crowd. The roar of the blast merged with the howls of rage and agony, the embassy quaking on its foundations, and high above, the crystalline spires fractured and crashed to earth, glittering shards raining down like jagged tears, the dream of Marian utopia lying in ruins. Anaya staggered out into the street, her ears ringing, her vision narrowed to a tunnel. Around her, the crowd milled in shocked confusion, cries of horror and disbelief rising from 1,000 throats. She barely heard them. Her mind was reeling, struggling to process the enormity of what she had done. The blood on her hands, the lives snuffed out in an instant of fire and fury. It had to be done, she told herself. A desperate act to save a species teetering on the brink. The Marians would have destroyed them all, in the end, smiling all the while secure in their benevolent tyranny. But the words rang hollow in her ears, ashes on her tongue. She had played the monster, become the villain, and in so doing perhaps lost the very thing she sought to save, her humanity, her soul, the best and brightest part of herself immolated on the altar of necessity. What kind of world would be left in the wake of such brutal calculus? What kind of species would they become, baptized in the fire of her terrible choice? Anaya didn't know, and in that moment she wasn't sure she wanted to. The weight of it crashed down on her, driving her to her knees. The tears came then, great racking sobs that shook her to the core. Around her, the sirens wailed. The city writhed, shaken out of its Morelian fever dream. And high above, the alien fleet glittered cold and pitiless, waiting, perhaps, to see what would rise from the ashes. Anaya wept, for the dead and the living. For the dream shattered and the nightmare birthed in its place. She had shattered the illusion. Oh yes, but at what cost?